All right, great. So hello everyone, my name is Shaheen Abdul Ghani. I am a member of the Executive Committee of SLMUN 2021, Sri Lanka's and South Asia's largest student-run MUN conference. Today I have with me 4 other members of the Executive Committee of SLMUN, and we will run through the basics of MUN, what a foreign policy statement or a position paper looks like, and how you can start research. So this is going to be a very insightful session for those of you who are new to MUN. So like I told you, we're going to cover MUN procedure, foreign policy statement, and how you can start MUN research. MUN is an extremely insightful experience for anybody. It's very educational. It's very enlightening. You learn a lot, and most importantly, you make a lot of good friends and learn some great networking skills. We think everyone will benefit. Next slide, please. But before that, let's understand what MUN is about. MUN, also known as Model United Nations, is the simulation of the United Nations, an organization that was set up with goals of maintaining world peace and harmony. This is where you students will be delegates and will be representing countries and their respective policies. And we will be chairs and will be moderating the debate, will be known as the head table. Here delegates, so you will be discussing world issues and you will be given respective countries and you will be going into different committees. This is where you would give your stance as a country on a respective issue. And this is a great experience for all those of you who like doing research and are constantly updated with what's going on in the world. It's very important for all of us to stay constantly updated, especially in today's day and age, when things are changing every single day. It's very important for all of us to be updated, and MUN gives you this chance. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to dive straight into MUN procedure first. But before that, let me just remind all of you guys, if you all have any questions, feel free to ask them when we get into different breakout rooms with you all a little bit later into the day, into the session. That's when you can raise your questions, and there'll be 2 chairs per in each breakout room. So you can ask your questions freely, and feel free to even drop in messages on the chat if you have any questions, and we'll try to see if we can answer it for you. If at all there is any concerns, like you can't hear me or something like that, please feel free to raise your hand, and one member of the executive committee will definitely respond to you and let me know. All right, so let's get into MUN procedure. Next slide, please. All right, so basically the thing that daunts a lot of MUNers, especially new children when they join MUN, is that usually they're put into a large committee with a lot of people and don't really know procedure. Procedure is really the stepping stone is one of the first stepping stones towards winning, your awards at MUN, which I'm sure all of you all are very, very capable of doing. So a lot of delegates find themselves really scared in committee when they don't know what the procedure is. And that automatically means that they don't talk and, they get really frightened. And that's what we're here to help you out with. We are going to have a thorough run through what procedure is like in committee, so that when you all do step into committee in the near time future, virtually or in person, either one, you'll be super confident and you'll be ready to, set yourself up as a good delegate in committee. So how procedure works is that firstly, everyone assembles into one room if it's in person or onto some sort of online platform. And then there are things called motions. Motions are how delegates, which I am going to be which will be you guys in the future. That's how you make a certain point to the head table or your chairs or to us at SLMUN. So motions are how MUN is all about motions and speaking in a timely manner. And there are different motions that we'll run through. So the first motion that you have, and that's the very beginning of of day 1 of MUN usually, is the motion to move into roll call. So everybody sits down, takes their seat, the chair hits the gavel on the table and says, all right, delegates, here we are in formal session. And the first motion that you would raise is a motion to move into roll call. So roll call is where all the chairs in their individual respective committees will call out a list of all the delegates who are in who are in the committee. So basically, you would all be given committees, and they'll be saying your names one by one in alphabetical order most often, and they'll be like delegate of Azerbaijan. And then if you're the delegate of Azerbaijan, you would raise your placard and say present and voting, which means that you are present in the committee today and that you have the voting rights to vote on procedural matters, on resolutions, on moderated caucus. Now, there are some states that do not have, that can't say present in voting, that can only say present. And one example of this would be Kurdistan, and that's because they aren't granted statehood by the United Nations and therefore cannot vote on things like resolutions in the GAs. So in that case, if you're given a state to represent, or if you are some sort of organization like Greenpeace or WWF, you can't vote. So all you would say is present. Then the chair would run through everyone. The chair would run through everybody's countries, and everybody gives whether they're present or not, and their voting stance. Now, it's very important for you delegates to be at the roll call, because this is basically how the chairs take attendance. And attendance is very important, especially at SLMUN, because if you want to be eligible for an award, you need to be there for both for the entirety of the conference and for one of the two practice debates. It's compulsory and it's mandatory if you want to be eligible for an award, which I'm sure all of you guys obviously want to be. So after roll call, the chair will ask, are there any other motions on the floor? And that's when one of you really brave kids are going to raise your placard and be like, motion to set the agenda. The agenda is basically the topic for the House. So you would say motion to set the agenda and just read what the topic is. And then the chair will say, okay, delegate, are there any seconds? Are there any objections? Seconds is basically when you say, yes, I'm for that and I'm voting for that. Objections is when you're like, no, I don't want that to happen. In MUN, if you want to object, you need to ideally have grounds to objection. You can't just get up and randomly say that you want to object. Usually in a motion to adopt the agenda or to set the agenda, there are no objections. And the reason for that is because all of you guys will be researching on one topic. And so there's only one topic to discuss. So of course, that's the one that's going to be set out in the agenda. Then based on the votes, this is most often a very easy, simple pass. The chairs will adopt the agenda, which means that the committee will now be formally discussing that topic. The next motion that the chairs will ask for is a motion to move into speakers list speeches. All right, so speakers list speech is the first impression that you as a delegate can have on your chairs. And it's honestly very important for you to make your speakers list speech. So what is a speaker's list speech? A speaker's list speech is a short 1 to 1.5 minute speech that each delegate gets in order to make a speech on the topic, which may include things that they want to discuss later on in the session, in the moderated caucus topic, what their country's stance on the topic is, what their stance on the topic is, what their foreign policy on the topic looks like, or some delegates just use speakers' speech as an opportunity, especially the first speaker's speech. It's an opportunity to, give everyone in the committee just a rough idea of what the topic is about and what ideally the parameters of debate should be like. And you get a 1 to 1.5 minute speech dependent on the committee and your chairs. And after you're done with your speaker's speech, I know it's extremely intimidating when you have to get up and, make a speaker's speech. So a lot of new delegates find it extremely useful to have their speaker's speech written previously. So before they come into committee, they have a speaker's speech already ready. Now, while that is amazing and, needs a lot of dedication to write, as you get used to the MUN format, you will find yourself, not using a paper. So the first time I made my MUN speaker's speech, I read word to word of this small, tiny sticky note that I was given when I was back in school. But now, as I have done a couple of years in MUN, I'm very confident with making a speaker's speech without a paper. So if you are relatively new to MUN, you might find yourself more comfortable making a speaker's speech of a paper, and that's okay. Chairs will definitely understand, but don't get too used to it. Become comfortable with talking on the spot, because honestly, MUN is all about talking on the spot, right? Thinking critically, thinking on your feet. The moment you feel like you want to say something, you don't always need to write it down. A lot of delegates actually find the writing down thing that slows them in committee. So a lot of them prefer not to. But if you're a first timer, feel free to use it. Chairs will be really, really proud of you. Just the fact that you're speaking up. And, you know, even if it means that you're reading off paper, chairs will be very proud of you and the committee will be very proud of you. So once you've made your speaker's speech, the chair will ask you if you're open for any points of information. Points of information, put in simple words, are just questions that some delegates may have to ask you. So this may be based on the content that you made in the speech. For example, if the topic was to do with abortion, and if I was Saudi Arabia, then Saudi Arabia's policy, the Sharia law, is against abortion. So my speech would be on the lines of why abortion is wrong and why it's not allowed in Saudi Arabia and why it shouldn't be allowed anywhere else. And then when the chair asks me for POIs, or point of information, probably the delegate of the United States of America can come and ask me and say, you know, why do you guys have this law? Or do you know that because formally abortion is not allowed, it can lead to the creation of back markets and things like that. So really questions, so the POI session is where different delegates in the committee ask you a POI. Once you ask a POI, you can, the delegate, for example, in this case, the delegate of the United States of America, if he's questioning me, he or she can also ask for a follow-up. So a follow-up is basically a secondary POI. So for example, I ask you a question, you reply to my question, and I feel like I want to ask you another question based on the answer that you gave me. And that's when I'm going to request the chairs to give me a follow-up. And so the chairs would give you a follow-up. Can we have the next slide, please? All right. So during and that entire process of one delegate making their speech and, you know, getting POIs happens a number of times in committees. It depends on committee to committee and conference to conference how many speakers' speeches the chair grants. But SLMUN is one of those conferences that has a very large, amount of time dedicated to delegates to making their speakers' speech, because we know that a lot of y'all come with the mindset that, you know, I want to make my speakers' speech. So we try to allot as much time as we can at SLMUN to make sure that you guys can make your speakers' speech and, you know, really, put out show us the hard work that you've done. As I told you, speaker's speech is very important because it also indicates to the chairs as to how prepared you are, but it also indicates to the committee as to how prepared you are and how confident you are. So even if you're new and you're really intimidated and, you know, scared of more experienced delegates, don't be, because of course you've got the chairs by your side at all times. At SLMUN, we try, the chairs try to be extremely catering to your novice delegates or your new delegates. I'm assuming a lot of y'all, when y'all do go for MUN conference, y'all will be novice, which means it will be your first MUN conference. So don't worry about messing up your speakers' speeches and things like that. It's honestly just about getting up and making that first statement. And the moment you've made your first statement, you're good to go. Like, you'll find all the confidence in the world to keep going. And that will ultimately, if you worked very hard and done good research, result in a very good award for you guys. But even in a case that, you know, the chairs don't have time to, obviously, some committees have like 60, 65 delegates. So it's almost impossible for chairs to, you know, have all 65 delegates give their speakers these speeches. So in the case that that happens, it's a rare case that that happens, don't worry, you still have more chances to speak. So there are some other points that you can raise in order to speak during, you know, the POI session that's happening. So for example, if I'm the delegate of United Kingdom and there's a discussion between the delegate of Saudi Arabia and the other delegates, and I didn't get the opportunity to ask him or her a POI, I can use some other motions. For example, the first thing that I can do is I can raise a permission to make a statement. I can raise a permission to make a statement, which is basically where I would want to get up and say something based on that speech. To run you through the next few points, I'll now invite Imad, and Imad will explain what the next few points do and how they help.
All right, thank you, Shaheen. Okay, so I hope everyone has been having an enjoyable time so far, and I hope you have somewhat of a solid understanding of the first part, of the basic steps of how procedure works, which Shaheen very well explained. So now we're going to go towards the other tools that Shaheen was talking about. So in certain cases where you may not always have the chance to give a speaker this speech, this is often because there are often time constraints, and the chair wants to make sure that everyone gets an equal chance to speak. Do not worry, because this is your tool to, establish yourself in committee. Our first step is the permission to make a statement. This is essentially where, after you have done your research, it's just a chance for you to basically voice out your opinion. To make a statement, all you need to do is ask chair permission to make a statement, and if recognized, there are a number of things that you can do. A permission to make a statement is very flexible, because what you can do is you can either make a statement based on the solution that you have found an interesting solution, and after research, it's unique to your country, and you want to bring that solution out. This is your chance to do it. In another way, then another way to use a statement would be that in the case that a delegate has made sort of a contentious remark, and there's a little bit of tension going on, and there's some and a certain country has, for example, said something that may not be exactly what they should be. It's a little bit ironic or a little bit contentious. Then you can also point this out. A statement is basically where you can come out and establish yourself. So with this statement, you can essentially give out your points and say, you know what, this delegate is being ironical, or these are the possible ways that you can improve on this, or even give your own unique perspective on the problem. So this is what a statement can be used for. Our second tool as part of procedure would be the right to reply. So this is something important. This is where there are three grounds to make a right to reply. The first ground is a foreign policy violation, the second being a factual error, and the third one being an infringement of sovereignty. So the right to reply is essentially where you as a country have a right to give a response when a certain nation or another delegate essentially points something out or they give a remark. So the first ground, the foreign policy violation, is where, for example, a delegate representing country A does not actually follow the policy that country A follows. For example, if I was following, if I was a delegate of the US and I said something that is contrary, to my policies, basically that does not go in line with what the official US government has been going forward, what happens then is another delegate, you can come up and you can bring a right to reply based on foreign policy violation and point that out. This is an important part to show that you are a delegate who is so well researched that you even know the policies of other nations, and the chair will mark you up if you are able to accurately show that this delegate has in fact violated his foreign policy. The second ground for a right to reply is a factual error. A factual error is, well, in the name self-explanatory. It's where a delegate has said something that is not actually true. So, for example, if a nation was to come up and say that the US does not have nuclear weapons, or something even very similar, that Germany does not have refugees residing in Germany, then you can bring up a factual error and you can say, no, this is not true. The fact of the matter is that there are refugees or there are nuclear weapons, and simply resolve that fact. This also goes to show how specific your research can be. And it gives a good impression to the chair as well, because the chairs will now recognize that you are a well-rounded delegate. And a third grounds is an infringement of sovereignty. This is where, as a delegate, you feel that your nation is being attacked, or you feel that your nation is being unfairly criticized. So if for example, if certain delegates were to say that Germany isn't doing enough for the refugee crisis, and they criticize Germany's actions, and if you were the delegate of Germany, what you can do is you can raise a right to reply and base it on an infringement of sovereignty, where you can defend your country's stance. You can defend your country's position. And for the right to reply, so once you bring up a right to reply, the country that you have brought the right to reply against will often have something called an inherent reply. So for example, if I was the nation of the US and I brought a right to reply based on a foreign policy violation to the delegate of China, for example, once I have finished my right to reply, the delegate of China has his own right, has an inherent reply to respond to my sentiments, to respond to my statements. So it's the same for the three grounds as well. Point of parliamentary inquiry is our third part of procedure that we're going to discuss today. A point of parliamentary inquiry is where you have a question regarding how procedure is going. So for example, you want to know, so if, for example, if since most of you are likely to be beginners, say that you're in conference and you want to know whether statements are going to be allowed after the POIs, it's going to be before the points of information. In this case, you can raise a point of parliamentary inquiry to the chair. When this happens, the chair has a responsibility to reply and answer your query. So for example, if one of the delegates asked if statements would be allowed after points of information through raising a point of parliamentary inquiry, the chair will say, yes, delegate, the statements will only be entertained after points of information. So if you get it, it's more or less a question regarding how procedure is going to work on that day. So normally your procedure is often going to be consistent, but in certain times where there may be time constraints and you want to know how many speakers are going to be speaking for the speakers list, or who is going to give the next month caucus, this is where you can use your point of parliamentary inquiry to clear any doubts that you have with procedure. Next, we have the point of order. A point of order is it's a part of procedure where in the case of the chair has mistakenly gone with another point, with another form of procedure. For example, if so after mod caucuses, which I will explain to you later, after a moderate caucus, you're supposed to vote on whether you're supposed to have seconds and objections. If the chair by mistake or accidentally skips this and straight away moves into the mod caucus, you can raise a point of order to tell the chair, which to more or less point out that this has been missed and it needs to be rectified. Often the chair may have his discretion or his or her discretion to why they did this, but in certain cases, this may be a point that you need to bring in case there may have been a slight misunderstanding or miscommunication. And the fifth point is a point of personal privilege. This is where it's a point basically to do with your whether you can hear the delegate well, whether you want to go to the washroom, if it's a physical conference, you can say that, sorry, if it's an online conference, often the point of personal privilege will be used to say that you had an internet connection issue and that you would like the delegate who was speaking just to repeat his sentiments, or you would like the delegate to rephrase it in a more concise way. So this is where you use the point of personal privilege. Okay, next slide, please. Right. So here we're going to speak about moderate caucus, which I spoke to you about. So a moderate caucus is very basically a subtopic of the main topic. It's a subsection of what you would like to discuss, and it's a great opportunity for you to really really shine and show your colors when it comes to the depth and breadth of your research. So, for example, if the topic was on if the main topic was on the refugee crisis, and if you're a good delegate and you researched well and you put in the time to, look at the different aspects of what this big refugee crisis topic encompasses or what it's about, you can bring a moderate caucus. And you can bring in a moderate caucus based on, for example, a subsection. Maybe it's about the situation in the refugee camps, or maybe you want to bring out the plight in the Syrian refugee camps when it's related to unemployment, or whether basically other aspects of the main topic that have not been discussed thoroughly enough during speakers list. So this is your perfect opportunity to really show where your own unique perspective and to really push your policy when it comes to the vastness of the topics that are often set. So the procedure is that the head table will often open the floor, where at this point, when the head table announces the floor is now open for moderate caucuses, that means you now have the opportunity to, if it's online, to send in the chat and say that this is your moderate caucus, or if it's a physical conference, to write it on a chit and submit it to the head table. So once you send in your moderate caucus, so say that the topic was on the refugee crisis and your moderate caucus was on maybe unemployment of refugees or hate crimes against refugees. Once you write your moderate caucus and you submit it to the chair. Then the head table will, at his or her own discretion, would look at the moderate caucuses that have been submitted by the committee, and will then pick the most relevant ones or the most pressing issues. If there is time, we'll try to go through all of them. But if not, the chairs will often prioritize. So it's really important especially when it comes to phrasing your moderate caucus, where you phrase it in a way that is not too specific, but it has enough room or enough space for delegates to have an understanding about it, and really, for other delegates to get a chance to speak on it. So what happens is then, once say that sometimes the head table may recognize your moderate caucus, and then if there are certain terms, if you mention certain treaties that are not very commonly known, the head table will often ask you to give a small, maybe 30-15 second statement based on what this moderate caucus is all about. Then once a mod caucus has been recognized and you're given a small explanation, the committee will now have to vote whether they are going to second it or whether they're going to object it. If they second it, once the chair will first ask for seconds, then the chair will ask for objections. If there are objections, there are two grounds to object a moderate caucus. As written here, the first ground is that it has already been discussed before. See that in this refugee crisis topic, that unemployment has been very well discussed by the other nations. Say that UK and Germany and all really came out and spoke a lot about unemployment. Then you can object against discussing the moderate caucus because it has already been discussed before and it won't be a productive use of committee time. The second grounds for objection would be it's out of the mandate. Certain committees have specific mandates to discuss upon. For example, the General Assembly 1 has a certain mandate and you can't go out of the bounds of it. So for example, it's not really appropriate for you to discuss about, say, something like the refugee crisis in General Assembly 1, because General Assembly 1 is more targeted towards disarmament and things like that. Similar things for other committees. So this is why it's really important that you research on the mandate of your committee to know what exactly are you able to research within the bounds of. And if you point this out, it also shows that you're a really smart delegate. So if this objection is granted, if there is an objection, then the committee will vote. If there's no objection and there are seconds without any objections, the moderate caucus will pass. So there are two situations that happen. In the first circumstance, that the moderate caucus passes, then the head table will ask the delegate who submitted the moderate caucus, say that Germany submitted the moderate caucus, the head table will ask the delegate of Germany to give a time frame and how many speakers are willing to speak. So normally, unless the delegate has a choice of how many seconds, whether it's 45 seconds and 4 speakers, or else the basic thing to do would say it is up to the discretion of the head table, and the head table will decide on how many speakers are going to speak and for how long. In the case that there is an objection, then there will be a committee vote. There will be a speech for why this moderate caucus should be discussed, and speech against why this moderate caucus should not be discussed. Then there will be a vote, and depending on the vote, the following steps will be taken. So if the vote passes, as I discussed before, the delegate will be able to speak on it, and other delegates can even raise their placard to speak on this moderate caucus. If it fails, if the objection is successful, then the chair will often move on to the next moderate caucus. But keep in mind, just because you may not agree with a moderate caucus doesn't mean that you should always object to it. So for example, if you were the nation of North Korea and say that the moderate caucus was discussing the situation of human rights in North Korea, you don't necessarily have to object to the moderate caucus. It's a smart move if sometimes, it depends on the case, but sometimes you may vote in favor of it, and then you have a definite chance to speak on the moderate caucus and give your opinion. It doesn't have to always be in favor, but you can give your opinion on that moderate caucus. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we are going to be discussing resolution debate and writing in FPS, really interesting components of MUN later in the breakout rooms. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Yasanjeeva to give a small explanation on the individual roles of the committee.
Hello, everyone. So I think we can turn off screen sharing if we are still in screen sharing mode. All right. So I was asked to explain to you what exactly the roles that there are at any conference. So to be honest with you, it depends, right? Because there are differences, right? But in the civics that you cannot miss out of. For example, you will definitely have a secretary general, right? If you do not know who that is basically like the main person, right? You'll have secretary general. Then you have under secretary generals underneath them, and you have different directors if there are any. For example, now prior to SLMUN, I was a director at a different MUN conference, right? You also have chairpersons. So those are the people who you basically are judged by, right? You will have 2 to 3 members minimum in almost every committee room. These are going to be the people who basically will explain to you how to, in practice debates, these guys are going to help you out in terms of how to MUN. And at conference, these guys are the people who's going to judge it, right? Apart from them, so there are different classifications, right? You have your president, you have your vice president, and you have your moderator. Sometimes committees have 2 presidents, sometimes 2 vice presidents, and no moderator. All of those depends. And I think if you've been to MUN conferences, you guys already know that, so I'm not going to go over the details. But I will specify on something, and that is administrative staff. So a lot of people don't know what admins are. And one thing is that a lot of people don't necessarily give them that due credit. So admin is basically a person who helps you guys, right? So for example, at a physical conference, if you have been to any, you all have to go ahead and give your moderator caucuses. It's not where you type something in, right? Like on a virtual conference, you actually have to write something down on a piece of paper for your mod caucus or your amendments, and you need to hand that over to the chairperson. If you were in a GA1, like I've been all my life, it would be very troublesome for you guys to go to the chairperson and give individually, because that's you're looking at about 100 people coming to the chairs. This is very annoying. So you basically raise your hand up with the sheet in your hand, and an admin basically comes, collects it, and gives it to us, right? If I was a chairperson for you. The thing is, a lot of delegates, whether intentionally or not, tend to believe that admins are their personal assistants, which is something that we are very against. We have a lot of respect for our administrative staff. They've helped out a lot more than you guys know. So it's something that you guys should respect as well as a delegate. Just remember that they are also part of the executive committee. They're not here to bring you water. They're not here to, basically attend to your comforts. These guys are basically here to assist you in order to make sure that debate runs smoothly. And that's the only reason that I'm basically going to be at a conference, right? So those are the basics when it comes to the different roles. In terms of what exactly they do, the different roles, I think it's self-explanatory. I don't think a lot of you are new. If you are new, I think it's kind of, again, self-explanatory. What everyone has to do, for example, if you're a director of, let's say, finance or something, right, or you're a treasurer, your role is kind of obvious, right? And Secretary General is basically someone who has to look out for everyone. And in a specific committee, the president is basically a person who has to look out for everyone while the rest of the two works as well. That's basically how it goes in an MUN conference, and change from conference to conference. But SLMUN in general have a standard form of chairs when it comes to the different positions that they get. So that's about it from my end as to what the roles of a MUN. So you guys, I hope you had a good time and you're basically still interested. I know that it was a lot. If you have not done MUN, I understand that you all have to just take in a lot of information. So just take some time to process it. The good news for you is that you will be given the opportunity to ask us questions. So don't worry about, stage fright or something if you have. Because you shouldn't be afraid. You can ask us any questions, because the goal of this workshop is to ensure that once you leave, you can go to any MUN conference and perform. Regardless of awards, the goal here is so that you guys can go to any MUN conference and you're able to speak, you're able to use your motions correctly. That's the reason why we're having this workshop for you guys here today. So that's generally how it works when it comes to roles. I hope all of you had a good informative session.